Hello everyone, this is Rick, and welcome to Astral Club. This episode is the Loosh Collectors, Plasma Dimension. Before we get into it, just want to mention Patreon. We have some new patrons on the channel. Tom, Jadzia, Nefi Takpi, hope I pronounced that right. They're all Astral Scouts, and Jennifer Davies, who is an Astral Master. If you'd like to join them, there'll be a link in the description, and you get advance episodes ahead of time on Sunday. You get downloaded episodes that you can put on your podcast apps. There's about 100 of them there now, I think. There's no commercials, an email where we can talk back and forth. If that's of interest, links in the description. Next up, private lessons. If you'd like to learn to astral project, be glad to work with you. There'll be an email in the description, and I'll send you information. Okay, let's get started. Now, if you missed the last episode, or the initial episode of the Loosh Collectors, I will put a link in the description, as indeed I will put the prior links to each of these episodes in each successive episode, so that in case you miss one, you can always make sure that you catch up, and they'll be pinned in the comments section. Please note that I'm going to send this out early. Normally I send these things out to my patrons early on Sunday, but I'm going to be sending them out early Saturday night, just to make sure that should anything happen, and I don't think it will, I think I'm okay at this point, but should anything happen, it will be my patrons' duty, if you will do me that favor, to make sure the information then gets out to the rest of Astral Club in the best way that they know how. So let's get into it. In the initial episode, I shared with you I was mistakenly pulled into what I can only describe as a glowing egg ship that was hovering above Earth. It was pulling in what I might call ribbons of energy, which Monroe described as loosh. Loosh, according to Monroe, and I can back him up on this supposition, is energy that is emitted by living beings when they go through a wide variety of emotions like love, anger, joy, hate, the pains of birth, the pains of death, sorrow, loss, etc. This emotional energy is undetected currently by human science, but it is of value to this particular race, and I will get into why it is and what they use it for. In that last episode, I was ejected from the glowing sphere, although I was still very near to it because I was entranced by watching these ribbons of energy coming up from the Earth, and they were coming up from everywhere, with the exception of the poles. China and India seem to have the thickest ribbons, which I guess makes sense because they have the densest and the largest populations on Earth. But they were coming in various degrees and various amounts from all around the globe. And indeed, there was also some coming from the oceans, but it wasn't as numerous as what was coming from the land. So I watched this happening, and the energy seemed to be collected somehow within this egg, which to my eyes outside, even my astral eyes outside of the ship, it didn't seem very large. It seemed about 10 foot by 4 foot, which is somewhere around 3 meters by 1.2 meters or something like that for you metric folks. But when I was on the inside, it looked a lot bigger. It looked about the size of a football field. And I suppose you could use that football in America or basically the football everywhere else in the world. It was big. And there was these glowing plasma beings that seemed to be constantly changing their shape and even viscosity, Colors would change slightly, getting darker and lighter. I'm not sure what, if anything, any of that indicated, but the energy was all coming to the ship and was being collected from the earth in the ship. When the energy seemed to slacken, I don't know why, because obviously I don't understand the whole mechanics of this Loosh collection. The ship seemed to hum and vibrate, and then without further notice, it darted towards an opening, which appeared to be a wormhole, otherwise known as the Einstein-Rosen Bridge. Unfortunately, though, I was being pulled along inside with it. It was like I was still stuck in the gravity of this egg ship, so I was being pulled unwillingly as well into this wormhole. It happened so fast that I didn't even really have time to react. I guess I was shocked and surprised, but I didn't even have time to be afraid because it happened so fast. As we were flying down or through this tunnel, it was different than I expected. It was multicolored to my astral vision, which kind of reminded me of the mythical Rainbow Bridge, which in various cultures was described as a bridge that would take you from one place, i.e. the physical, to a non-physical place. So I was surprised to find that it did indeed have those colors. I don't know, for some reason I always imagined it was black and white, but that's not what I observed. We traveled down through this tunnel until we finally, and I have no idea what time it took, it was difficult to judge. We emerged in a very alien space. I was expecting empty space and stars like I normally see. Instead, what I was confronted with was plasma. The space oozed with plasma. Then, as I scanned the space, which I just did automatically, I always do that to determine, if there's any life forms or any intelligences, and I felt that there were billions of very alien intelligences swimming about, I guess is probably the best term I could use, in this plasma reality or dimension. I suspect it was a dimension too. Einstein-Rosen theorized that, of course, this bridge, or what we call wormholes, would connect two different spots in the universe. But I imagine there's no reason why it couldn't also connect two different dimensions, for instance, or two different time zones. All of that, I believe, would be covered in such an apparatus like a wormhole. I started moving through the plasma myself. It was odd because it felt different than usual empty space does. I could sense the energy that was flowing through this plasma. I automatically tamped it down because it was too much. The energy was just much too much. It was like a million different songs playing all at once, and it's just too much for the senses. I started to explore to the best of my ability, although it was difficult because there was no familiar frame of reference. In space, you can always look for a star or a planet, and then with a line of sight, and your astral vision's very good with that, you can move and will yourself to a particular place. But in this plasma dimension, I found myself just drifting aimlessly because there was no points of reference. I was fairly ignored at first, but then I started to notice that there were beings that started to pull around my basic area. Now, as I said, there was billions of them. They were everywhere. And I noticed that there were egg ships that seemed to be unloading the energies that they had collected. So I saw many of them. So it's obvious that there wasn't just one, there were many. And these beings were swarming all over this, I assume, Loosh energy. But what was starting to freak me out was that I also felt that they were being attracted to me. And they started to kind of swarm about me. And I had the most existential dread that I have ever felt in my lifetime. And as you know, I've told you many of my stories, not all of them, but many. And I rarely feel fear, or certainly this type of severe dread. I felt like I was suddenly a main course in a banquet that I had been invited to, but not as a guest, as the entree. My first thought was to project love. That's often something that helps to maintain or initiate contact with alien intelligences, because they can at least understand that type of goodwill, even if they're a very different organism. However, all that seemed to do was agitate these beings, and they seemed to draw closer towards me. So I switched gears. I tried hate. Figured, well, that's the opposite. They slowed, but they kept on coming. So now I was definitely looking for an exit that I couldn't find. And in this strange dimension, in this plasma, I was looking for some sort of way out. But at the same time, I wasn't willing to give up, because this was a brand new world, dimension, galaxy. I don't know what you want to call it. And I didn't want to just abandon it without doing some sort of research, even if it was a bit risky. I'll be honest, I started to feel panic. But then I used the litany against fear to calm myself down. And I decided to do what's called a Hail Mary pass. Try something different based on my knowledge of Robert Monroe. If you recall, Robert Monroe said that these Loosh collectors had gardened, had caused the earth to change to fit their needs for high quality Loosh. Because the animals, though they were producing Loosh, it was not of sufficient high quality to meet whatever their bizarre standards are. So I thought back to when I inhabited the body of that 75 million year old giant dinosaur crocodilian. And I conjured up the thoughts, such as they were, and the basic thought process of this primitive animal brain. And I submerged myself in my memory of that experience. So for a period of time, I think I became that animal, that primitive Loosh machine, if you will. And that stopped them dead. And they just started to wander off. In a weird way, I was a little like, well, what's the matter? Am I not good enough? But of course, in a much more realistic way, I was relieved that I had seemed to escape the menu based on the fact that these were connoisseurs and I was offering them some Thunderbird wine, some Night Train wine, which for you younger millennial types was a very cheap wine that the Gallo brothers used to make, and it would be often bought by those who were very poor or perhaps students, college students who were able to get their hands on any darn thing that they could afford. So I was quite happy that I had seemed to escape their notice now. But now I was faced with another dilemma. I didn't want to be mistaken for Loosh and consumed, obviously, but I wanted to see if I could somehow attract the attention of one of these beings or multiple of these beings, whatever, that would be willing to speak with me. Or if I could establish some sort of a dialogue, because I wanted to find out what makes these things tick, why they decided to collect Loosh or this emotional life energy from Earth, and what they did with it and why they needed it, and perhaps bring up some ethical issues if I could, to perhaps establish some diplomacy or at least get some reasons or explanations as to why they felt the need to harvest this without humans' permission. I began to cautiously look about this plasma universe and extended my awareness level to see if I could sense some intelligence that perhaps I could establish some sort of relationship with. I scanned for a while when I suddenly happened upon one of the blobs that seemed larger than another. And it seemed like it wasn't hungry, which I thought was perhaps a good thing, because I wanted to talk, not be invited for dinner. I beamed a very clear, high-energy, telepathic invitation to this being to come and talk with me. It stopped its course, hesitated for a moment, and then started to move slowly towards me in what I considered a non-aggressive movement. When it approached me, the first thing it beamed towards me in a kind of hesitant way to start with. It said, "You do not belong here." At this point, I'm going to stop this episode and look for the conclusion on Saturday, where I find out some very interesting information about these beings. If you liked this, please hit the like button, share it with those of like minds. Subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure that bell is solid. Questions and comments, definitely need them for this particular and all Loosh episodes. And as always, this is Rick, and I will see you on the astral plane.